Number 1.
When the unrecognizable body of Jeannette Depalma, 16, was found atop a steep wooded hill that the locals called the Devil's Teeth in 1972, rumors spread quickly that the Springfield girl was killed in some sort of satanic rite or witchcraft. Police sources leaked to the press that they had found signs they thought might be related to the occult, including crosses made of sticks and branches, arranged in a coffin-like outline around her body. The coroner's report mentions a rock formation surrounding the body. The Star-Ledger reported that police even brought a witch to the site to inspect for signs of the occult. But crime scene photographs released for the first time this week seem to debunk those claims, showing that Depalma's body was simply lying in a dense, brushy area in Hiddale Quarry, face down with an arm draped over a downed tree branch. There are branches lying across one another by her head, but they do not appear to be arranged in a purposeful way. Jason Coy, a history professor at the College of Charleston who researches witchcraft and superstition, said he can't find any sign of the occult or any other symbolism in the jumble of brush and branches. It suggests that investigators, looking for something sinister, saw patterns that weren't there, or perhaps their initial descriptions of the branches near her body became exaggerated or misconstrued in the retellings of the scene. Coy was one of several experts featured in Death on the Devil's Teeth, a 2015 book by Mark Moran and Jesse Pollock, who had written about the case for Weird NJ magazine. Coy recalled being shown a sketch of the crime scene then, drawn based on the memories of people who were there, depicting many crosses around the body. Everything in that sketch that was marked out as a cross, in these crime scene photos, just looks like a pile of underbrush that happened to be in a kind of pattern, he said. I think it's a perfect example of how sometimes in someone's memory, if they are influenced by the idea that something could be occult, they remember things that way. Authorities called it a suspicious death from day one, but the cause of death was never determined, due partly to the decomposed state of the body when she was found. The cold case was never ruled a homicide and has never been solved. On Monday, 18 months after a public records request by New Jersey Advance Media, the Union County Prosecutor's Office released a trove of documents from the case file that have never been publicized. Among them are photographs of the crime scene and the remaining evidence, including Jeannette's sandals and the contents of her purse found nearby, as well as a report of a driver who said she picked up a hitchhiking girl who matched her description the night she went missing. Depalma's parents reported her missing August 7, 1972, after she left home to catch a train to visit a friend in Summit, according to newspaper reports at the time. Her body was found September 19, 1972, after a dog came home with a human arm in his mouth, police said. Long after the media coverage died down, the cold case remained an open wound for Jeannette's family, friends and the tight-knit community, where many people started locking their doors. Details were scarce, and speculation was rampant. I mean, the biggest thing that we now know from this conclusively is this is 100% not an occult killing, Pollock, one of the authors, said of the released documents, which he also requested and received Monday from the prosecutor. He said he had previously interviewed several police officers who dismissed the claims of satanic symbolism, and the photos support that. So why were some people so willing to believe a girl was sacrificed in some kind of witch or satanic rite? Depalma's death was about 8 years before the period starting in the 1980s, known as the Satanic Panic, when now debunked stories of ritual child abuse dominated the media, and some in law enforcement were looking for signs of the occult everywhere. But fears of Satanism and witchcraft were on the rise already in the 1970s, Coy said, in the wake of pop culture influences like Rosemary's Baby and coverage of the Manson family killings and Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible in 1969. Even rock bands like Black Sabbath frightened older generations and spurred evangelical leaders to warn of the rise of Satanism, he said. You start to see it becoming more of a concern of law enforcement and religious leaders and that kind of thing. Youth culture in the early 1970s fostered a fear of dangerous, drug-crazed hippies, Coy said. I think this is a good example of how the police, the media or whoever might have been quick to suggest an occult connection that may not have been there or probably wasn't there. There were also local murmurings that teens in the area were practicing witchcraft and animal sacrifices had been found in the nearby Watchung Reservation. A year earlier, across the state in Millville, a 20-year-old had asked his friends to drown him in a kind of satanic ritual, according to police. The friend, one of two convicted of killing Patrick Michael Newell, told police Newell asked them to tie him up and throw him in a pond because he belonged to a Satan worshippers sect and said he had to die violently so that he would be put in charge of 40 leagues of demons, according to the Vineland Times-Journal. No drug tests. The photos also call into question one officer's theory that Depalma's body was found at a teen party spot, Pollock said. In addition to being extremely hard to get to, the area appears to be dense brush with no signs people had been there, such as a fire pit. The officer had theorized that Jeannette had overdosed on drugs with friends at the spot and been left for dead, Pollock said. Documents released Monday show that in 2004, an investigator for the prosecutor's office posited in a memo that it would appear that the most logical cause of death is drug overdose, though he listed no evidence that suggested it. While that may have been their most recent theory, police at the time did not have Depalma's remains tested for drugs, the documents reveal. Then medical examiner Dr. Bernard Ehrenberg sent a scalp sample to a forensic laboratory, initially asking on the request form for tests for alcohol, heavy metals, barbiturates and narcotics. But he or someone else crossed out the latter two drug tests on the form, and they were apparently never performed. The specimen was not suitable for alcohol testing, but tests did find an elevated level of lead, reports show. A doctor told police it was not near lethal levels and could have come from dirt contamination of the body, according to the documents. Police noted in evidence inventories that they recovered a vial of unknown substance among her possessions, but it does not say whether they suspected it contained drugs or ever tested it. Depalma's family has rejected the overdose theory, maintaining that she was a good girl who didn't use hard drugs and was very involved in her church. The police narratives and evidence inventory also support the idea that someone was with Jeannette on the top of the Devil's Teeth or possibly carried her there. They show that her personal items, including makeup, an inhaler and the vial, were found about 8.5 feet away from her body. Her purse and a cross necklace she wore were never found, despite a search of the woods, according to the police records. I used to never think anyone carried a body up there. But the amount of overgrowth and how secluded that spot looked, it seems like the body was hidden. Especially when you take into account that the purse seems to have been dumped out next to the body, Pollock said. But the spot is so remote, so difficult to reach, that a fire truck with an aerial ladder was used to retrieve the body. It's not the easiest hiding spot to get to. It's one of those cases where every question you answer opens up 3 new questions, Pollock said. Witness describes possible sighting. Adding to the mystery is a memo detailing a police interview with a then 19-year-old woman who told police she picked up a hitchhiker whom she believed to be Depalma on the night she disappeared. Reached by phone Monday, Robin, who asked that her last name not be used, recalled the night in question. She said she was driving from Kenilworth to her apartment in Berkeley Heights around 10:30 or 11 p.m. on August 7, 1972, when she saw a very small, young, dark-haired girl hitchhiking on the corner of Morris and Springfield Avenues in Summit. I pulled over and I said, "Why are you hitchhiking so late, and where are you going?" she recalled. She said, "I'm going to Berkeley Heights to meet some friends." Robin told the girl she could only take her as far as her own apartment on Kuntz Avenue off of Springfield Avenue, and the girl replied that was fine because she was meeting friends just a block away at the intersection of Springfield and Snyder Avenues. The girl was very quiet in the car, fidgeting with a necklace and her pocketbook strap, Robin said. The girl got out of the car on Springfield Avenue and Robin recalled seeing her walking toward a small group of young people near the traffic light on Snyder Avenue. When she heard about Depalma's body being found, Robin said she realized she matched the description of the girl she had picked up. Robin had marked it in her calendar, a habit of hers to keep track of when things happened, and showed that to police when they interviewed her. While Robin on Monday couldn't recall details about the girl's appearance beyond her small stature and hair color, police wrote that she said the girl was wearing dungarees, a light-colored top and sandals. Police said Depalma's body was discovered wearing tan dungarees, a blue shirt and sandals. Police also wrote that the encounter happened around 8:30 p.m., But Robin said she was sure it was later because it was fully dark and she was surprised to see the girl hitchhiking at that hour. Ed Salzano, a former Springfield resident who has investigated the case on his own and runs the Facebook page Justice for Jeannette, said that if the girl was Depalma, it raises the question of where she was all day and suggests that the people she met might have valuable information. She had told her family, when she left earlier in the day, that she was going to a friend's house in Berkeley Heights, but the friend told authorities she never arrived. Salzano, who said he still believes there could be a satanic connection, unsuccessfully sued the prosecutor's office in 2019 to perform DNA testing on Depalma's clothes or confirm rumors that the evidence had been lost previously. He said he hopes the office will check for DNA on the sandals, since they at least remain. The Springfield Police Department evidence room was flooded by Hurricane Floyd in 1999 and some evidence was destroyed. According to correspondence between police and the prosecutor's office after the flood, Depalma's clothes were not among the items that were inventoried after the flood. The Union County Prosecutor's Office declined to discuss the documents on the record but has said that there are additional records it plans to release in the future. The case remains open, and anyone with information is urged to contact the Union County Prosecutor's Office at 908-527-4500.
Number 2.
While walking on the beach, many people look out for a number of things: shells, buried treasure, crabs, and dolphins among them. But if you're on a beach in British Columbia, you might want to keep an eye out for something a little more sinister. About 15 severed feet have washed up on the shores there in the past few years. The latest was found on May 6, wedged in a mass of logs on Gabriola Island, according to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The feet have been surprising unlucky British Columbians for over a decade. The first appeared back in 2007 on Jedediah Island. It was eventually matched to a deceased man whose family declined to provide additional information. Bizarre, but not particularly alarming, until another one showed up on Gabriola Island less than a month later. More feet followed, and though some were matched to missing persons, most remained anonymous. Feet, unfortunately, don't contain much identifying information. Instead, police focused on the fact that each foot was encased in a running shoe, though sizes, genders, and brands differed. This seems like a real-life episode of The X-Files, but it turns out there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for the severed feet. They're not really severed, which would indicate cutting or slicing at all. According to scientists who tested the theory, the feet likely belong to suicide, drowning, or plane crash victims. It's common for decomposing bodies to come apart at the joint, making it natural for the foot to come apart from the leg. But if that's the case, wouldn't hands be similarly susceptible to washing up on beaches? Nope, that's where the shoes come in. While the rest of the body naturally decomposes in water, feet are surprisingly well protected inside the rubber and fabric of a shoe. The soles can be pretty buoyant, and sometimes air pockets get trapped inside the shoe, making it float to the surface. Most of the severed feet have been clad in jogging shoes such as Nikes and Pumas, but at least one case involves a hiking boot. In that instance, the boot and foot was matched to a man who went missing while fishing more than 25 years ago. The most recent case also involves a hiking boot. That leaves the question, why British Columbia? According to Richard Thompson, an oceanographer with the Federal Institute of Ocean Sciences, it's connected to ocean current. There's a lot of recirculation in the region. We're working here with a semi-enclosed basin. Fraser River, Falls Creek, Burrard Inlet, all those regions around there are somewhat semi-enclosed. The tidal currents and the winds can keep things that are floating recirculating in the system. Several feet have also been found further south, in Washington state, which shares a network of coastal waterways with British Columbia. Others aren't so quick to accept this scientific analysis, however. Criminal lawyer and crime author Michael Slade still wonders if a serial killer is afoot. We also have to consider that this could be a serial killer, he said. Somebody who right now is underneath the radar. That has to be on the table.
Number 3.
Once a beloved staple of towns across Westchester and Fairfield counties, the leather-clad silent vagabond's true story remains elusive. Westchester is no stranger to urban legends and ghost stories, mayhem and murder, but few instances are as inexplicable or oddly wholesome as the true history of the Leatherman, a nameless wanderer who circled Westchester and Fairfield counties in an unbelievable 365-mile loop while living in local caves. Most likely born sometime around 1839, the individual known as the Leatherman was first spotted around 1857, wandering between the Connecticut and Hudson rivers, dressed head to toe in a heavy, handmade leather suit of slacks, shirt, jacket, scarf, hat, and even boots weighing approximately 60 pounds. Despite his gruff appearance and wardrobe like something out of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, locals quickly determined the Leatherman to be not only harmless but quite gentle. A Burlington Free Press article from April 7, 1870 notes the leather-clad man rarely spoke, usually only in monosyllables or grunts and gestures, but capable of some broken English. However, he was apparently fluent in French and kept a French prayer book among his few worldly possessions. Rumors circulated that he was originally from Picardy, France or somewhere in French Canada. Declining meat on Fridays, it was presumed that he was Roman Catholic. The stranger walked a clockwise loop of 365 miles through Westchester, southern Putnam, and western Fairfield counties, making stops in Purdy's, Kensico, South Salem, Croton Falls, Yorktown, Shrub Oak, Briarcliff, and even the now affluent Bedford Hills. Incredibly, he walked the complete circuit in about a month, stopping off for supplies and returning to each town every 34 to 36 days or so. A Leatherman's Loop 10K is held along part of this every year in Cross River. While other Civil War era vagrants might seek work or a place to sleep, the Leatherman preferred to sleep in one of nearly 100 Leatherman caves like the one you can still find at Ward Pound Ridge Reservation, surviving blizzards and hard weather with only the occasional light frostbite and building fires. The Leatherman would stop by local farmhouses looking for food, so regularly in fact, that locals often looked forward to his visits, with many housewives baking extra bread for his arrival. In A History of the Town of Louisboro by the Louisboro History Book Committee and historian Alvin R. Jordan, Miss M. Louise Boughton, born in 1889, recalled the Leatherman came around once a year, always to the east side of the house. He would knock on the leader drainpipe. Mother would give him coffee and some sandwiches. He would say, "Thank you so much, lady," but never look at you. He was dressed all in brown leather. No one was afraid of him. Incredibly, the quiet traveler became something of a local celebrity in these towns. 10 different Connecticut villages even passed local ordinances to specifically exempt him from the state's 1879 anti-vagrancy tramp law. Once, in 1888, the Connecticut Humane Society had him arrested and hospitalized, however he was found to be sane, except for an emotional affliction and released. Desiring freedom and apparently possessing the money to travel, he was left to his own devices in the countryside. How exactly the Leatherman came into his money was never known. One local store reportedly kept a record of a usual resupply order, which was paid in person before the Leatherman moved on. 1 loaf of bread, a can of sardines, 1 pound of fancy crackers, a pie, 2 quarts of coffee, 1 gill of brandy and a bottle of beer. The Leatherman's body was found on March 24, 1889 in a Sawmill Woods cave in Mount Pleasant, on what was then the farm of George Dell. Despite his harsh life, he had not lost any digits to frostbite and appeared in good health. His cause of death was determined to be mouth cancer from the use of chewing tobacco. He was laid to rest at Sparta Cemetery along Route 9 in nearby Ossining, with the following engraved on his tombstone: final resting place of Jules Bergley of Lyons, France, the leather man, who regularly walked a 365-mile route through Westchester and Connecticut from the Connecticut River to the Hudson, living in caves in the years 1858-1889. The name Jules Bergley was originally attributed to an 1884 article in the Waterbury Daily American. However, this was retracted the day after his death. Still, the erroneous tombstone remained in place until 2011, when construction along Route 9, just 16 feet away from the grave, led to the decision to exhume and rebury the Leatherman in a new plot within the cemetery. Plans were also made to test the body to possibly help determine the Leatherman's true origins. This was not to be. In the centuries since his death, legends sprung up around the beloved Leatherman. He was in love with a wealthy French heiress who was denied to him after he accidentally burned down her father's factory and possibly home, killing her before fleeing to America. He himself was wealthy but fell in love beneath his station and suspected his parents had his love murdered. His restless spirit still haunted the paths along Buckout Road. Also, soil settled and earth shifted. When his grave was exhumed, little was left of the Leatherman's coffin save for a few nails and scraps of wood. No body could be found, and no new information would be gleaned. Local Leatherman historian and author Dan W. DeLuca had raised funds for a new, more accurate memorial, and so a new coffin was filled with the original coffin nails and burial soil. DeLuca places 4 pennies on top, and the local legend was again laid to rest with a new grave marker that simple reads the Leatherman.
Number 4.
Betty Shanks was a lively 22-year-old who studied psychology at the University of Queensland in Australia. Shanks was born in 1930, and by the time she got to university, she was still living with her parents. Many people have looked into this dead end of a case, including Ken Blanche, Ted Duz and Lyle Reed. But mysteriously, all of their theories were swept under the rug, leaving the unanswered question, who killed Betty Shanks? On the 19th of September, 1952, Betty Shanks was only a few meters away from her house when she was beaten and murdered. She was walking home from her night class when it happened. The next morning, at around 5:30 a.m. or so, her body was found in a police officer's neighbor's garden. It was clear that she was brutally hurt, with bruises and cuts on her body. So who did it? Theories. Theory 1. After Betty Shanks was murdered, a popular theory amongst people was that she was mistaken for a doctor's secretary. She was beaten, so the suspect could take the keys to said doctor's office. On September 22, 1952, a man called Donald Carter had committed suicide. Donald Carter was a well-known doctor. As this happened 3 days after Betty was killed, people started connecting the dots. But perhaps they were connecting the wrong dots. Dr. Carter's sons, Doug and Noel, both gave mouth swabs to the police, but the DNA didn't match the genetic material on Betty Shanks' body, and so this theory was ruled out. Theory 2. Another theory is that Betty Shanks was run over by a man on a motorcycle. At first, the injuries did not kill her due to them not being severe enough. It is thought that the killer returned to her around an hour later to finish the job by strangling her, which is unconvincing at best. This theory was thought of by journalist Lyle Reed. Interestingly enough, Reed had a family member linked to the crime in his book I Know Who Killed Betty Shanks. Many people, including journalists who have covered this case, believe that Betty Shanks had gotten out of a past relationship with the alleged killer and that he had probably been stalking her, with murder being his intention. However, journalist Jack Sim believes otherwise. It would have been impossible for Betty Shanks to have been stalked by her murderer. As mentioned before, Shanks was only a few meters away from her house, in which both of her parents lived. As usual, the porch light was switched on, and Betty's mother had been listening for the gate, as it would signify that her daughter was home. If she was really stalked by her murderer, Shanks would definitely have been killed earlier on her way home, rather than right beside her house. Conclusion: well, Betty's case is still being investigated, but there were never any reasonable leads. From being mistaken for a doctor's secretary to being run over by a man on a motorbike, there are many theories out there. But for now, Betty Shanks' death still remains an unsolved mystery.
Number 5.
On December 1, 1946, Paula returned to her dorm after working 2 shifts at her dining hall job. She spent some time studying before telling her roommate she was going to take a break and go for a hike, though she did not mention her destination. She left wearing a red coat that was not suitable for the cold weather and carried no money with her. She also left an uncashed check from her parents behind. It was clear that Paula had intended to return after her short hike. Paula was seen hitchhiking around 2:45 p.m. when a driver picked her up from the side of the road. She told the driver that she intended to hike the long trail near Glastonbury Mountain. The driver dropped her off about 3 miles from her destination. After this, several people reported seeing Paula walking on the long trail. The final sighting was reported by a man who said Paula had asked him about how long the trail actually was. This was around 4 p.m. The sunset occurred at 5 p.m. that day, and it began snowing after night fell. There were no records of Paula leaving campus, despite a rule that students had to sign themselves out if they were going to be off campus later than 11 p.m. They were also required to check back in upon their return with the Bennington security office. Paula had neither signed out nor checked in with the security office. However, her disappearance was not looked into until Paula failed to attend her classes the following Monday. The college president phoned her parents to inquire whether she had gone home for a visit. This call sounded the alarm that something was deeply wrong, and Paula's father traveled to Bennington to begin the search for his daughter. The way I see it, there are 4 theories. Most of them are viable. The last one we will look at is not so much so. Let's look at the theories from most likely to least. The first theory is that Paula went off the trail, got lost and succumbed to the elements. This is the most viable theory to me. Paula was not dressed properly for the weather or the terrain. It seems likely to me that she wandered from the trail and got lost. She could have misstepped and got injured, limited her mobility. And because it was so cold and began snowing after sundown, she likely succumbed to hypothermia. The fact that her body has not been found could easily be explained. Paula could have sought out some hidey hole to shield her from the elements, making discovery of her body all the more difficult. And it's gruesome, but animal activity could have scattered her remains as well. The second theory is that Paula was murdered. This can be broken down into 2 subcategories. Paula was murdered by someone she knew, and Paula was murdered by a stranger. I personally don't see any evidence that anyone in Paula's life had a motive for wanting her dead, and there was no evidence that anyone she knew was on the long trail that day. That means for this theory to work, Paula had to encounter someone that killed her in a crime of opportunity. Paul Gadet is the strongest suspect in this theory, having lived so close to where she went missing, coupled with his behaviors during the investigation. Maybe she was killed because she was alone and pretty. Maybe she saw something she shouldn't have, like a smuggling operation. After all, the long trail went all the way to the Canadian border. Is it likely? No. Is it possible? Yes. The third theory is that Paula left to start a new life. I rank this as unlikely for a few reasons. First, Paula left money and an uncashed check behind. Unless she was working with someone else, which is something that there is no evidence of, she would be starting from square one, which is incredibly difficult to do. Second, if Paula was running away to start over, wouldn't she have dressed warmly enough to ensure her survival? Again, this could be explained away if she was working with someone else, but, again, we have no evidence of that. I can understand why this is a theory, though. She was struggling with her identity as she figured out what she truly wanted from life. She was a little down, but she was dealing with it by looking for ways to change her situation. Why would she throw that all away to start over with a blank slate? Our final theory is that the Bennington Triangle caused Paula to disappear. We've taken an extensive look at the Bridgewater Triangle before, so you kind of get the gist of the idea. The difference between the Bridgewater and Bennington triangles is that the one in Bennington does not have the overt supernatural aspects to its mystery. The Bennington Triangle is known for its disappearances. Between 1945 and 1950, 5 people went missing within its confines. This theory revolves around the idea that there's something about the triangle that lures people in and vanishes them. Whether that means they're killed by some malevolent force or slip between dimensions depends on the individual doing the theorizing. However, I don't find these disappearances so outrageous, which makes me discredit this theory. Paula's disappearance was one of the main catalysts for Vermont to establish their own state police force. The governor effectively used her as a way to shame legislature for their greediness. They had previously voted the idea of a state police force down because they did not save the money. This is what led to the New York and other nearby state police forces becoming involved in the investigation. Vermont's state police force was formed a year after Paula disappeared, in 1947. Another event in the aftermath of Paula's disappearance involved legendary horror writer Shirley Jackson. Jackson was living in North Bennington at the time of the disappearance, and her husband worked at Bennington College. The disappearance affected everyone in the area, and Jackson was no exception. The experience of witnessing the aftermath inspired her to write Hangsaman, her second novel, which is about a young woman going off to college and losing touch with reality.
Number 6.
On a Sunday morning in May 1957, a woman bewitched by despair after having been forcibly separated from her children decided to commit suicide. She took what she believed to be lethal quantities of aspirin and phenobarbital and got into her car with the intention of colliding somewhere at full speed. Residents of the small town of Hexham, Northumberland, England saw her driving erratically through the quiet streets. Her final stop was a wall running along a sidewalk. She rammed right at it but didn't die. Instead, the collision killed 3 children who happened to be walking to church in that very moment. They were trapped between the car and the wall behind them. The impact tossed them into the air like cricket balls. The woman was taken into custody and eventually sent to a psychiatric facility. The 3 children, 11-year-old Joanna Pollock, her 6-year-old sister Jacqueline Pollock, and their friend, died. Their families were bereft. And that was the end. Or was it? The Pollock twins. Over 1 year after the tragedy, John and Florence Pollock, the parents of Joanna and Jacqueline, turned a new page in their life. On October 4, 1958, Florence gave birth to 2 identical twins. The girls were named Jillian and Jennifer. Immediately, the parents noticed a weird coincidence. Jennifer had 2 birthmarks. One was a round dark mark on the left side of her waist, identical to a birthmark little Jacqueline had had. The other was a slightly depressed mark on her forehead, over the right eye. This one was identical to a scar Jacqueline got when she accidentally fell and hit her head on a bucket. But there was more to come. Coincidences? When Jillian and Jennifer were 3 years old, they were presented with the old toys of Joanna and Jacqueline that had been boxed away in the attic for the past years. The girls didn't find over them. Jillian claimed Joanna's toys as her own, and Jennifer claimed Jacqueline's. Since Joanna was 5 years older than Jacqueline, she had taken a more motherly and responsible role towards her younger sister. The Pollock parents observed a similar dynamic with the twins. Jillian was acting more mature and responsible than Jennifer. Jennifer accepted Jillian's motherly attitude towards her without question. Joanna loved experimenting with costumes and acting in plays she made up. Jillian had the same interests. Joanna also used to say often, "I will never be a lady," something her parents later understood as a premonition that she'll never grow up. Joanna and Jacqueline were raised predominantly by their grandmother because John and Florence had been busy with their grocery and milk delivery business. By the time Jillian and Jennifer were born, Florence was free and acting as the primary caregiver. Yet, the twins kept turning to their grandmother for love and guidance. Joanna and Jacqueline liked combing people's hair, especially their father's. Jillian and Jennifer did too. Right before her death, Jacqueline was still learning to write, and her teacher had told her parents that something needs to be done about the girl holding pencil upright in her fist. When Jillian and Jennifer started learning to write, Jillian held the pencil correctly right away. Jennifer struggled with it until age 7. Still, even as a young adult, she reverted back to holding the pen upright in her fist very often. Joanna had a slender build, while little Jacqueline was more stocky. Jillian's slender build contrasted Jennifer's in the same way, even though they were identical twins. But what did the twins themselves have to say? The stories they told. When the twins were 9 months old, the family moved away from Hexham. 3 or 4 years later, the Pollocks returned for the first time. Jillian and Jennifer were familiar with the area and wanted to cross the road and go to the park and the swings, clearly knowing their way around. When Joanna and Jacqueline were still alive, Florence wore a specific smock to help her husband with the milk delivery business. Jacqueline was still little and home all the time, while Joanna was at school and not present when Florence delivered milk. When the 2 girls died, Florence stopped helping with the business and the smock was stored away. When Jillian and Jennifer were almost 5, John put on the smock to do some painting. Jennifer saw him and asked, "Why are you wearing Mummy's coat?" John asked her how did she know this was her Florence's coat. Jennifer replied that her mother had worn it while delivering milk. Jennifer also became extremely annoyed with Jillian, who couldn't recognize the smock. Once, Jillian pointed to Jennifer's forehead birthmark and said, "That is the mark Jennifer got when she fell on a bucket."
Number 7.
April 15, 1994, the beach area of Sunset Cliffs, San Diego, California, was shocked by the discovery of a body floating in the sea. The body was found by 2 surfers who were suspicious of a seagull on top of something floating. It was a female with long brown hair and a butterfly tattoo on her shoulder. She had nothing but jewelry on. After being reported to authorities, she was taken to the Coast Guard. An investigation was launched. Robert Engel, the medic who searched the body, said she had not been in the water for long. In addition, he stated that her right leg was missing and there was a torn wound. He concluded that she might have died from being attacked by a great white shark. The next day after the incident, the body was officially autopsied. Brian Blackburn, the autopsy officer in charge, said that the right leg that broke from the thigh down to the bottom was not the only wound on the victim's body, but there were cuts, bruises on the face, and several broken ribs. There was also sand found in the mouth, throat, stomach, and lungs. Blackburn concluded that the victim was still alive when she received the injuries. He also refuted the shark death toll theory, but many doubted his opinion because he had never autopsied a shark attack victim before. After carrying out an autopsy and further investigation, the identity of the victim was found. Her name was Michelle von Emster, a 25-year-old Californian working as an employee at an office supply store. The police formally concluded that the cause of death was a shark attack. She was thought to have gone swimming or entered the water in the middle of the night, after which a shark attacked her. Discrepancies in the discovery of Michelle von Emster's body. A witness said that the night before the incident, he had seen Michelle around 8 p.m. At that time, Michelle was wearing a green coat and carrying a bag. It was this testimony that helped the police determine the approximate time of Michelle's death. The bag that Michelle brought was later found on the beach, and not a single item was missing. Richard Rosenblatt, a medical expert who had handled shark attack cases, denied the cause of death released by the police. According to him, if a shark attacked Michelle's right leg until it breaks, there is usually a piece of shark teeth left behind. That assumption was later supported by the statement of a pathologist named Harry Bonnell. Identifying the cause of death that did not come from shark bites revealed by Rosenblatt and Bonnell was the same as the results of Ralph Collier's research, which specializes in the lifestyle of great white sharks. Collier, who saw Michelle's body firsthand, said he saw no resemblance to the part of her leg that broke with shark bite marks. He even dared to say Michelle's case was not about shark bites, but rather a wound cut by a knife. Especially if you see the amount of sand in Michelle's body, putting that much sand requires a strong push. If bitten by a shark, then Michelle has no chance of swallowing that much sand. The fact that Michelle was found naked made people think she did take off all her clothes before swimming. After investigation, the beach's temperature was too cold to swim naked in the middle of the night. Theories in the mystery of Michelle von Emster. There were many different medical experts' opinions, making the mystery of Michelle von Emster feel too soon to be closed, because other possibilities should still be investigated. Because of this, there were several theories about Michelle's death. Edwin Decker, who went on a date with Michelle von Emster, but whose romance with her was cut short upon her death, revealed that Michelle liked to swim naked at night. This theory predicts Michelle swam naked that night but was swept away by the waves and crashed into a reef. The discovery that the beach was cold on the night of the incident clearly invalidates the theory that she was swimming naked. Although maybe the wounds on her body appeared because her body hit the coral and was bitten by a shark. Michelle fell into the water. The Sunset Cliffs area has cliffs that might make Michelle fall and hit a rock so that there were wounds on her body. This theory was possibly rendered strange by the fact that Michelle must have been walking on the cliff naked. Michelle was murdered. The bruises and fractures on Michelle's body could possibly be the result of being tortured by the perpetrator. The theft possibility was dropped because Michelle's bag that was found did not show any missing items, especially when her body was found. Michelle was still wearing jewelry. The discovery of a lot of sand in her body could be because she was forced to swallow it by the perpetrator. Officially, the case was closed, but the issue of Michelle von Emster's death remains a mystery to those who disagree with the official cause of death. The kind of mystery that surrounds Michelle von Emster and her strange death inevitably provokes diverse theories. Because we can never get a definitive answer,